The topic of ethics in research is very important for us, of course. This area has been really influenced by a number of landmark cases. You're probably familiar with the Tuskegee syphilis study, which was a decades-long study of untreated syphilis in almost 400 black men. These men were refused treatment for syphilis even after the penicillin cure was known. So this is now viewed as a highly unethical study. Had clear problems in that participants were harmed and they had no consent, no choice in this matter. Another landmark case was the Milgram obedience experiment. In this study, you may know, a teacher was told to deliver electric shock to a learner who was seated in another room. Now, the learner was a conspirator of the researchers, and the shock wasn't really happening, but the teacher didn't know that. And it turned out that almost 2/3 of the subjects in this study agreed to deliver a high voltage shock when told to do so, even after it appeared to cause distress, severe pain, and even unconsciousness. So the study was done to show that people will obey authorities, even if there are significant problems with that. And after their participation in the study, subjects were debriefed. They were told about the real purpose and methods of the study. They were told that this was really a sham. They hadn't really hurt anybody. And some subjects were very distraught about their participation in the study, really distraught to learn that they had been willing to deliver such painful treatment to someone they couldn't see. So issues here involve deception and harm to participants. Another landmark case was published in a book called The Tea Room Trade by Laud Humphreys. Humphreys, a sociologist, observed sex in public men's rooms in a Midwestern town. He was the lookout, so he could cover for these folks and also observe what was going on. He also recorded the men's license plate numbers and followed them. They tracked them down and later interviewed them in their homes under the guise of being some sociologist interviewer. And he gathered information on their work and family lives. Now, the findings of this study are important, and he found that only 14% of these men identified as homosexual, and many of them were really upstanding members of the community with wives and nice houses and children and 2 cars in the garage. But the study raised lots of ethical questions and raised concerns about people's right to privacy and right to informed consent. And how do you balance those rights with the idea that we do need to know about some things that are difficult to study? Another landmark case occurred some time ago in social work. And in this case, William Epstein, a social worker, was interested in studying journal editors' decisions. So he sent a fictitious article and several variations on this article to 200 journals simultaneously to study editors' decisions. Now, there were multiple ethical violations in this project, including deception, lack of informed consent, plagiarism, and so forth. The National Association of Social Workers censured William Epstein and threatened to remove him from the profession, but he appealed and was reinstated. Here's some more common problems. Recent research has shown that what we call p-hacking, looking for significant p-values, also known as data dredging or fishing for positive significant results, is very common, especially in the health sciences, in psychology, and in the cognitive sciences. This is an ethical problem. More generally, underreporting of research results and selective reporting of results is scientific misconduct. Less common problems include other forms of research misconduct, such as fabrication, fraud, and plagiarism. Fortunately, those problems are relatively rare, but they do appear to be on the rise over time. So there are some well-established current guidelines for ethical principles in empirical research. There's a set of guidelines for the protection of human subjects and another set of guidelines for the protection of non-human animal subjects. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services coordinates with other U.S. federal agencies and has produced what's called a common rule for the protection of human subjects. You can learn about it on the HHS website. There are lots of reports, and you can learn about the history of the development of ethical guidelines for research on this site. Oops. And then many institutions have their own institutional review boards, or IRBs, to ensure the responsible conduct of research. So of course Bryn Mawr College has one, and if you were to conduct a study at or with Bryn Mawr College, you would need to go through this IRB. Well, let's talk about some of the major ethical issues that can arise in research. So here's an overview of the topics I'd like to touch on, at least briefly now. Informed consent means that participants or prospective participants are entitled to a full explanation of the purpose of the research, the procedures involved, alternatives to participation, all foreseeable risks and discomforts, including possible psychological, social, or economic harm, or discomfort, or inconvenience. They're entitled to a full explanation of the possible benefits of the research to society and possibly to the individual participant, if there are any benefits to the participant. They should know what the time commitment is, what length of time is involved at each interview, if we're doing interviews, and over what duration of time. They need to be given the name and contact information for a person who can answer questions that they may have or deal with research-related injuries or emergencies. The statement of informed consent must include a clear statement that participation is voluntary and refusal to participate in a study will not result in any consequences or loss of benefits. And the statement must include information about subjects' rights to confidentiality and the right to withdraw from the study at any time without consequences. Informed consent is best thought of as a process. It's not just a form that we ask people to sign, but it's a process of providing information and listening to questions and making sure that people understand their rights as participants. Voluntary participation means that people should be able to make autonomous decisions about their participation in the study, that we have the right to refuse or to participate or to withdraw at any time without consequences. Now, this is easier to say than do. Sometimes coercion may be implicit, and that should be avoided. So sometimes people are asked to participate in studies that are being done in their workplace or in their education program, and they think that they're expected to participate or that somehow they're going to get some intangible benefit when that's not really true. And those conditions can be viewed as coercive. Monetary compensation can also be coercive in some situations. So institutional review boards often take a lot of interest in the conditions under which people are being asked to participate, whether there's any subtle element of coercion, and what monetary compensation might mean for participants. It's important to understand these issues of confidentiality, anonymity, and privacy in research. Confidentiality and anonymity are not the same thing. So confidentiality means that a participant's identity is known to the researchers but cannot be disclosed to people outside of the research project. So this means that the researchers cannot identify individuals in reporting research. They're going to have to keep individuals' identities secure. But they can follow up with individuals. They will have contact information themselves. Now, an exception to this norm of confidentiality is sometimes made, particularly for social workers, who have a duty to warn authorities if there's a reason to believe that someone is a danger to themselves or others. So that would be grounds for breaching confidentiality. Now, anonymity, as I said, is very different. This means that the participant's identity is not known to the researchers. So the researchers cannot link individual identities to responses. They cannot follow up because they don't have contact information for participants. So anonymity is an even more secure way of protecting people's identities, but it does limit researchers' ability to follow up. And then privacy goes along with both of these concerns. It just means that information about participants cannot be shared, must be stored securely, and also that we really need to think about the kinds of questions that we're asking people and whether we have the right to know about people's private lives and why we want to ask private, sensitive questions. Another principle here is that there should be no harm to subjects, and that includes avoiding any physical or psychological harm, distress, or discomfort. So in advance, participants should be fully informed of any risks of discomfort. So for example, we might be asking questions that raise difficult material or memories, or could threaten someone's self-esteem, self-image. If that's the case, people need to know that. And then researchers often provide resources, including referrals for support or mental health services. Deception of participants can now only be used with IRB approval if there is no other way to obtain what's determined to be socially valuable information. So it's a very difficult decision that researchers cannot make alone. They have to seek approval from an IRB to use deception. And the question here is the deception worth the knowledge to be gained, and is there any other way to get it? So if deception is used, the researchers are obligated to debrief their participants afterward as soon as possible, unless that debriefing itself could cause harm to participants, as it did in the Milgram experiment. Then there are a number of ethical issues in analysis and reporting of data. So we have the obligation to readers to provide a full and unbiased report of research and to disclose any conflicts of interest or potential conflicts of interest. We have ethical obligations to colleagues regarding authorship and credit for the work that's done. And for more information on reporting and publication ethics, there is a really useful group called the Committee on Publication Ethics, or COPE, that has a website with a lot of information on research ethics. And that's all for now.